Hello again, kiddo. It's great to see you again, and it makes me so happy to spend this time with you. I really enjoy telling you these stories, and I really think you will enjoy this one. If you are listening to this, it probably means the day ran a little long, or your mind is still moving around, even though your body wants to rest. That is all right. Some nights sleep comes quick, and some nights sleep needs a story to lead it home. Tonight, I want to tell you about a man from baseball's early days. A man who could hit a baseball like it was drawn toward his bat. His name was Joseph Jefferson Jackson, but you have probably heard him called something else, Shoeless Joe. And I want you to know something before we begin. This story is not just about baseball. It is about work and money and pride and the quiet ways a person can be misunderstood, and the way a legend can grow so large it starts to feel like it belongs to everyone. So settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. Let the rain do what rain does. And I will tell you, gently, the story of Shoeless Joe Jackson. Chapter 1. A Boy from the Mill Towns. Joe Jackson was born in South Carolina, in Pickens County, on July 16, 1887. His father's name was George. His mother's name was Martha. His father worked hard, like most fathers did back then, and like a lot of fathers still do. The family moved when Joe was still very young, from Pickens County to a place called Pelzer, and later to a mill community near Greenville called Brandon Mill. Now listen, to understand Joe, you have to understand the mills. The mills were loud. They were dusty. They ran for long hours. Families lived close together in company housing. Work was steady, but life was thin. SABR, the Society for American Baseball Research, describes Brandon Mill as a place where Joe's father worked for about $1.25 a day. And Joe, the oldest of 8 children, started working at the mill when he was about 6 or 7. 6 or 7. That is the age most kids are learning spelling words, learning how to hold a pencil, learning how to sit still in a chair. Joe was learning how to stand up all day, how to do a job that adults struggled with. His family could not afford education the way we think of it now. So Joe grew up functionally illiterate. He could speak fine. He could live fine. He could work fine. But reading and writing were hard, and that would follow him for the rest of his life. And when you hear about the trouble Joe later got into, and how papers were signed, and what lawyers said, and what reporters printed, it matters. It matters a lot. When Joe was about 10 years old, he got sick. Measles. The sickness hit him so hard that he was bedridden for weeks. The accounts say he was paralyzed for a time, and his mother nursed him back. Imagine being a child, lying still, listening to your house, hearing other people move around, and not knowing if you will stand again. That kind of thing changes a person. Maybe it makes you less afraid, or maybe it makes you more careful, but it makes you different. Joe did stand again, and he went back to work, back to the mill, back to the dust and noise and long shifts. And somewhere in there, between the mill and the little scraps of time that were still his, baseball arrived like a small, bright lantern. People in those mill towns played baseball to breathe again, to feel like something belonged to them, to feel like their hands could make something beautiful instead of just making a living. Joe started playing for mill teams as a boy, and his talent showed early. He first pitched, but there is a story that he threw so hard he broke another player's arm, and nobody wanted to face him. So they moved him to the outfield. And that is where people noticed the real miracle. Joe could hit. He did not hit like a trained man. He hit like a man born with a gift. The ball met the bat, and the bat met the ball in a way that seemed inevitable. And somewhere around those early years, Joe started using a bat that would become famous. A bat named Black Betsy. The story of Black Betsy has a few versions, but one commonly repeated account says it was handmade for Joe when he was young, and it became linked to his legend. To people who loved baseball's old folklore, Black Betsy became almost like a character in the story. Now, I want you to keep something in mind. A lot of sports history is like that. Facts and folklore get braided together. A true story begins, and then 100 people repeat it, and then it becomes something bigger. But with Joe Jackson, that is part of the point, because his life became a tug of war between what happened and what people wanted to believe. And his nickname, Shoeless Joe, was born from a moment like that. In an interview remembered from the October 1949 issue of Sport magazine, Joe described how he got the name. He said he had blisters from new cleats, so he took his shoes off before batting. Then a heckling fan saw him running to third in his socks and shouted something like, "You shoeless son of a gun, you." And the name stuck. It is almost funny, isn't it? How a lifetime can be renamed by one voice in the crowd. Joe kept playing. He moved from team to team. He chased better pay. He chased better competition. He was not chasing fame yet. he was chasing survival. And then, in time, the major leagues came calling. Chapter 2. The Natural Hitter. Joe Jackson's major league career began in the late 1900s. He played for the Philadelphia Athletics. Then he played in the minor leagues for the New Orleans Pelicans. Then he joined Cleveland, the team then called the Naps. These team names change over time, like towns change and people change. But Joe's bat did not change. In 1911, Joe had his first full season with Cleveland, and he hit .408. That number is not a typo. 408. And importantly, that season is still recognized as a rookie record. Now, if you are not a baseball person, let Grandpa explain what that means. A batting average is how often you get a hit when you get a chance to hit. Hitting 300 is excellent. Hitting 350 is rare. Hitting 400 is a mountain most people only see from far away. Joe hit .408 as a rookie. Some players become famous for power. Some become famous for speed. Some become famous for defense. Joe Jackson became famous for contact, for the clean, natural swing, for making the ball find grass. Over his career, he would finish with a .356 batting average, one of the best in Major League history. He also piled up hits, runs, and stolen bases, and he built a reputation that traveled ahead of him like a rumor. In later decades, baseball writers and fans would rank him among the greatest. Wikipedia notes that in 1999, the Sporting News ranked him among the top 100, and he was connected to MLB's All-Century Team discussions. But long before lists and rankings, there was simply a feeling. If Joe was batting, something might happen. Eventually, Joe moved from Cleveland to the Chicago White Sox, and the White Sox of that era were talented, very talented. But talent is not always enough. In baseball, in life, the world does not always reward skill. Sometimes it rewards power. Sometimes it rewards timing. Sometimes it rewards luck. And sometimes it punishes people who do not understand how the game off the field is played. Joe played through 1920, and by then the storm was already building. Chapter 3, 1919, the series, The Whispering. The year 1919 sits heavy in baseball history. That was the year of the World Series between the Chicago White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds. Now, to understand the scandal, you need to understand something about baseball then. Baseball was popular, but players did not have the leverage they have now. They were tied to owners through a system that limited their freedom, and gamblers were a shadow presence around the sport. Some White Sox players were unhappy with money, unhappy with management. And into that frustration, gamblers offered a poison that looked like relief. Money to lose, money to make mistakes on purpose, money to help the other side. The scandal that followed would be called the Black Sox scandal. 8 White Sox players were accused of conspiring to fix the World Series. Joe Jackson was one of them. Now, here is where the story becomes complicated, and why even today people still argue about Joe. Because the facts cut both ways. Joe admitted to accepting money in connection with the fix, but Joe also insisted he did not throw games. And when you look at his performance in the series, it does not look like a man trying to lose. Joe led the series in hits. He set a World Series record with 12 hits, a record that stood for decades. He hit .375 in the series. He hit the only home run of that World Series. Even sources summarizing his series line describe it as outstanding. So why was he punished the same as the others? Because baseball, in that moment, was not just judging the games. It was trying to save itself. In 1921, the players were acquitted in court. But baseball's new commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, issued a statement anyway. And that statement became iron. It said, in effect, that regardless of jury verdicts, no player who throws a game or promises to throw a game, or even sits in the meetings and does not report it, will ever play again. That is a harsh rule. It was meant to be harsh. Landis wanted to restore faith. The National Baseball Hall of Fame describes that ban as his first major act as commissioner, and it quotes his declaration as a guiding line. And that is the thing, kiddo. When institutions panic, they do not always choose justice. They choose deterrence. They choose symbolism. They choose an example. Joe Jackson became part of that example. Chapter 4, Joe's version, and the legend that followed. There is a famous phrase tied to Joe Jackson. Say it ain't so, Joe. The story goes that a child said it to Joe outside the courthouse, and Joe answered with something heavy and honest. But later, Joe said the exchange never happened. Still, the phrase became legendary, not because it was proven true, but because it captured the feeling. Baseball is often like that. It runs on emotion as much as on facts. Joe's guilt has been debated for a century. Some say he was a full participant. Some say he was a simple man trapped in a complex conspiracy. Some point to his World Series performance as evidence he played to win. Some point to his admission of receiving money as evidence he was involved no matter what. There are even discussions in the historical record about Joe's legal representation, about how a nearly illiterate man navigated testimony and paperwork, and how much agency he truly had. The details are messy, and in a bedtime story, we do not need to shout about it. We can hold the mess gently in our hands. Because what matters for your sleep tonight is not the courtroom heat. It is the human story. Joe was a man who came from mill dust, a man who could not read well, but could hit a baseball like music. He became famous, then disgraced, then turned into a debate. And that is a hard way to live, even if you do not have to read the newspapers to know it. After the ban, Joe did what a lot of people do when a door slams shut. He tried to keep going. He played baseball under assumed names in the South. He managed teams. He stayed close to the game, even when the game tried to erase him. Later, he opened businesses, a dry cleaning business, a barbecue restaurant, and eventually a liquor store. And there is a story about Ty Cobb, the famous rival and star. Cobb visited Joe's store. Joe did not immediately show recognition. And when Cobb pressed him, Joe replied that he knew Cobb, but he wasn't sure Cobb wanted to know him. That is one of the saddest lines in old sports history. Not dramatic, not angry, just weary. A man saying, "I know who you are. I just do not know if you are allowed to know me." Joe died in 1951. The debate did not die with him. It grew. Chapter 5. The House, the Bat, the Memory. Even after baseball banned him, Joe remained a kind of hometown figure. In Greenville, South Carolina, they eventually created places to honor him. A memorial park, a statue, and perhaps most importantly, a museum. Joe's original home was moved and restored, and it became the Shoeless Joe Jackson Museum. The museum address is 356 Field Street, a nod to his .356 career batting average. Think about that. A man who never got a Hall of Fame plaque got a street number built from a statistic. Sports are funny like that. Numbers become memorial stones. And then there is Black Betsy. Black Betsy is one of those objects that becomes a myth, an artifact that carries the story like a ship carries a flag. Wikipedia's entry on Black Betsy notes it was a bat associated with Joe, and it became famous in collecting circles with record-breaking auction history. Different sources argue about which bat is the real Black Betsy in later years, because once an object becomes valuable, people fight over its identity. But for our purposes tonight, Black Betsy is not just a bat. It is the symbol of a boy from the mills holding on to the one tool that made him extraordinary. In that old sport magazine feature, preserved by the museum, the writing paints Joe as an aging man sitting in Greenville, a legend still alive, still tied to the scandal that erased his name from record books. And that is one of the haunting things. Joe was alive long enough to watch the world keep talking about him without giving him his place back. Some men live long enough to see their story retold by people who never met them. Joe was one of those men. Chapter 6. The rule changes after the man is gone. For decades, baseball kept Joe on the permanently ineligible list. There were petitions, arguments, historians, fans. In 2015, Commissioner Rob Manfred reviewed a petition and declined reinstatement. That remained part of the story for a time. But then something changed. In May 2025, MLB announced a policy decision. Permanent ineligibility would end upon death. That policy removed deceased players from the permanently ineligible list. That meant Shoeless Joe Jackson was no longer permanently ineligible and could be considered for Hall of Fame processes again. Major outlets covered the decision, including the Associated Press. MLB's own release explained background and referenced historical Hall of Fame ballots. Now, kiddo, Grandpa is not telling you this to make you angry. I am telling you because it is part of the long arc of the story. Sometimes rules shift. Sometimes institutions soften. Sometimes a door opens, but it opens late. So late that the person who needed it most is not there to walk through. That is life sometimes. Not fair, not neat, but real. And if you are still awake right now, listen carefully. This is the part of the story I like best. Not because it is happy, but because it is quiet. Baseball finally said, "We cannot keep punishing a dead man forever. We cannot keep pretending the story is finished." So they changed the rule. And Joe's name, for better or worse, re-entered the room. Chapter 7. Grandpa's Closing Thoughts. The sound of a clean hit. If you strip this story down to its bones, it is not just about guilt or innocence. It is about how fragile reputations are. It is about how money can twist people. It is about how a man can be brilliant at one thing and vulnerable in other ways. Joe Jackson was a natural hitter. The rookie record season, the career average, the World Series hits record. Those are facts, and they matter. But the other facts matter too. The millwork, the illiteracy, the money changing hands, the band that did not care about court acquittals. Those are facts too. And the truth may be that Joe lived in the middle of it all. Not fully hero, not fully villain, just human. And that is why on a rainy night, a story like this is perfect. Because sleep does not need a simple ending. Sleep only needs a voice that says, "I am here. I remember. You are safe." So if you can, picture a baseball field under old stadium lights. Not the bright modern LEDs, the softer lights, the kind that make shadows on the grass. Imagine the pitcher winding up. Imagine the ball leaving the hand. And imagine Joe Jackson standing with a bat that feels like part of him. Maybe Black Betsy. He watches the ball. He swings. And for just a second, everything is clean. The sound of the hit, the motion, the simple truth of skill. Whatever else happened, that part was real. And now, kiddo, let the rain take over. Let the room grow heavier. Let the story fade at the edges the way all bedtime stories do. Good night.